So now we're going to be moving on to the next presentation from International Chamber of Commerce and AOKpass. Presenting, and allow me to introduce Dr. Chester Drum, co-founder of AOKpass, Mr. John W.H. Denton, Secretary General of the ICC, and Ms. Andrea Petrini, Project Manager, Office of the Secretary General of ICC. Please take it away.
Thanks very much, and it's actually Andrea Petrini, who's a man, but John Denton speaking. So I'm the Secretary General of the ICC. The ICC is the world's largest business organization. We're an independent, for-purpose, not-for-profit. We have a seat at the United Nations. We're the only private sector organization that does. We sit, for example, on the COVAX Council, the only private sector that does, in order to ensure equitable distribution. We are what's known as a very high trust organization. We have our own courts, we create policy, and we represent 45 million businesses in the developed and developing world. At the beginning of the COVID crisis, I shifted the whole of the power and the structure and the operations of the ICC to support action to actually bring about an end to the pandemic. In that regard, we've actually got policy arms we use. We use our very vast membership. We also use our capacity to create standards, and we also use the high trust with which we're held to actually create tools as well. So we do all those things. So we create policy, standards, and actually create tools. In creating policy, and when we do standards, we've got the capacity to globally scale, and we can create interoperability, which is something which is a unique quality of the ICC, and we create tools. So policy, standards, and practical outcomes to enable business. What we saw with the pandemic was that our role had to be, how do you bring about an end to the pandemic? And as the pandemic has evolved, we've gone from actually creating tools to save and work on the SMEs, the real economy, which was really hit. And then we've actually got heavily involved in this issue about how do you make a workable outcome, get a risk-managed outcome. So in March last year, we initiated the process to pioneer the idea of creating a digital pass, which could authenticate someone's health status and the COVID-19 status. We did that because we have a view that ultimately governments were going to need to move to some risk management profile in the absence of vaccines, and even when vaccines were available. And we were right. And so we then instituted a policy intervention to shift the global world to accept risk management, which I think is we've been very largely successful, but also then created campaigns, a ticket, a test, and also a tool. So AOKpass was the pioneer of the leading tool that was created to actually enable this kind of risk management to be given effect to. And we work very closely with Chester and his team to create that. The fact that ICC has co-created this gives a huge level of trust and confidence. And as you know, you only move at the speed of trust, and because we're so trusted. So we've actually moved legions. What we're focused on at the moment is actually the equitable access to and distribution of vaccines and mobility. Both are huge, access to mobility. Both are huge issues, and ICC AOKpass plays a critical role in both, because you can actually create on this pass a digital attestation of someone's COVID-19 status and actually proof of whether or not a vaccine has been delivered. It becomes a very useful risk management tool. We've gone from travel alone. We're now looking at, we're in the midst of doing a whole of economic ecosystem in Spain, where we're looking at the town of Girona, where we're opening up that whole town as a pilot for the Catalonian government and ultimately for Spain, to see, in the absence of access to vaccines, whether we can create a safe return to work, safe to economic recovery process. So that's what we're doing. That's who we are. And the opportunity for us is to actually work. We see the reason we're doing this is to end the pandemic and ensure that millions and millions of people are actually able to return to healthy lives, risk-managed lives with confidence, and actually get their businesses going. That's why the ICC is involved. And I'll hand over to Chester.
Thank you very much, John. So greetings from Singapore, where it is now midnight, but still happy to be working with the group today. So we can just go ahead and dive into it. My background is that of a medical professional and blockchain architecture. So we've been working on this for about a year's total time now, in a complete privacy preserving architecture, which is specifically designed for GDPR environments with complete authentication. So the founders are, of course, the ICC. Just as an example, they've been making international commerce rules for almost a century. So at the moment, almost $12 trillion worth of commerce goes through rules that were affected by the International Chamber of Commerce arbitration. Our other partner, founding partner, is International SOS. So many people on this call are clients of International SOS. They're a very large international medical services organization. So 70% of the Fortune 500, if your executive who's overseas has a problem, many of you have an International SOS card in your wallet to solve that medical problem through their network of about 90,000 global affiliate clinics. And that global assistance network becomes fundamental to determining the fastest way for testing services and onboarding to flight safely. Our last partner is, founding partner is SGS, which many of you know is a large Swiss testing and certification firm, which brings a high level of quality and industrial services beyond the travel sector. So next slide. So we have our own global standard, but we're extremely excited to work with other standards as well. In particular, we have an active seat on the ISO 215 to make sure that our efforts ultimately are reflected in longitudinal ISO standards. I just came off a WHO committee just several days ago for the vaccine standards of how we're doing electronic certificates for vaccines. And lastly, an exciting new project is the Good Health Pass initiative, which I believe Charlie Walton mentioned in the chat, which is again multiple groups coming together to find common standards for electronic certificates. And in this arena, which I'll discuss very in short order, the need for interoperability is key. And because we're a public-private partnership with the ICC, that is our remit to provide a quality product, but also to facilitate interoperability with multiple products, because the world is a big place. Not everyone is in Pakistan at the moment. We're the dominant player in Pakistan. Not everyone is widely distributed in Europe. We're doing very well there. And Asia, with the Singapore headquarters, of course, we'll talk about some interesting experiences we've had here and regionally. So the ultimate point is to provide quality and interoperability. Next slide. You're welcome to have these slides at the end. I'll just make clear that not only do we have a digital solution, we spend a lot of time on global advocacy. Largely that, of course, is through the International Chamber of Commerce. I would not normally find myself presenting directly to Tedros Adhanom of the WHO, but at the invitation of the ICC with a good idea. It turns out many of the senior governments in Europe and Asia are extremely open to standard setting. We've made a lot of progress there. As you know, that's a difficult problem to solve. We can go to the next slide. So International SOS as a company is, if you've heard of it, then you know they're a very large company. They just got a $1 billion contract from the Department of Defense for their overseas health services. And it's just one contract of many. So they have a very large and established network. They're known for quality and very quick and solution-oriented business practices. Interestingly, they're founded in Singapore, even though the founders are French. But we work very closely with the founding team in addition to their global network of provider clinics to provide our clients easy access to pre-flight screening. Next slide. We have either pending or active agreements with a variety of airport networks, and there's actually some new airport networks that are coming on the line. We'll discuss the specifics of where we are with our implementations network-wide, working more with airport networks than with airlines as a facilitator of that. Next slide. Yeah, so I think I kind of covered this. I'll also emphasize the great work that's being done at WTTC and the UNWTO. So we are central to those committees, and they're extremely supportive of the efforts of integration, and we appreciate their support. In the recent announcement from the president of the OECD countries, our solution was also emphasized as a model solution by the Prime Minister of Spain, who's the president. So, we do have some nice geopolitical presence, and what we're seeing is a move towards a fully decentralized record for health record certification, authentication. Next slide. So this is an interesting experience. So on December 21st, we began crossing passengers across the border of Singapore. So, and only people on this call realize how hard this is to do. An immigration officer in Singapore used a blockchain system to authenticate a medical record from a foreign country. And although that sounds simple, it's actually very hard to make that happen. So we were honored to work with our partners in the Ministry of Health here in Singapore, and also a series of clinics in Japan. So this was a Narita to Changi route that we operationalized, and there was Singapore Airlines that carried that pass. And so that's a standard which we've been working with here in Singapore. And I can go into more detail about what it takes to actually do that, but that's all the way from booking to lab to pass generation to authentication of that, and installation of software at the site of the immigration gantry to provide that authentication. And with all of that, you have a seamless experience to walk straight through the immigration gantry. For those of you who've been through Changi Airport, you know the baseline experience is actually very good. So they're loath to disrupt that with COVID screening. And indeed, with electronic clearance, it's almost as if you're just walking straight through immigration, straight into the country. It's quite remarkable. Next slide. So this is just the general architecture. You have information which is resident on the phone. You have a verifier function, and of course, it's a mutual blockchain verification signature, which actually is a verification hash system of that medical information. But the most important thing is we never keep any information at all, period. And so that makes GDPR discussions much easier, because even that blockchain verification signature is not a one-to-one hashing. It's actually an amalgam of verification signatures, which obviates the need to be forgotten requirement of GDPR. So we're quite confident in our decentralized system, but with absolute authentication. And I can tell you from even though it's a confidential discussion at this point, I think it's reasonable to say that the WHO indeed is looking at decentralized records with centralized authentication technology as the future for global vaccine records. The specifics of that are still being kind of hashed out, as it were. Next slide. So this is just an example of the maritime industry. So most people here talking about airplanes, you can be on a ship a lot longer than you can be on an airplane. And some of these guys have been on boats for 6 months. There's some very sad stories of people who've been trapped on maritime operations because of COVID. So we operationalized a route between Singapore and Songkhla port in Thailand, and made some young men very happy to get off the boat. With their medical clearance. Next slide. And so this is an example of vaccine. We have 4 vaccine large trials, that we've done, and we are in use within the Geneva headquarters at the moment at WHO as well. Next slide. This is I mentioned Pakistan. So again, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my link in the chat. But operationalizing different kinds of countries requires different kinds of solutions. So we were asked to assemble 100 labs and provide absolute blockchain secured authentication all the way from the laboratory to check-in. And that's exactly what we did for Etihad. And you download our app from the Etihad website. And at the moment, we have quite high throughput on that route. So I think that's generally been felt to be a success. I can tell you it wasn't as easy as one might have guessed. Next slide. At the moment, we're very busy in Rome. Some may have seen a recent feature on us in the Wall Street Journal. So if you look at AOK Wall Street Journal, you'll see a nice 5-minute summary. So ADR has also been very supportive. That's at airport testing protocol. We can go into detail at your request of how you do at airport testing at us stations as well. Next slide. And then, of course, we have a great relationship with the ADP. So ADP is just a superb airport network. And right now we're concentrating on Paris to the outlying territories. And that should be launching probably within 2 weeks with it. Next slide. Lastly, national sovereign implementation. So we just got off the phone with the Iberian Peninsula, which includes Spain and Portugal, if you don't happen to know. The ability to extend a pass through immigration all the way into sovereign activity, that is the next horizon, especially for us. So having sovereign partners, again, that can work with us in an interoperable fashion, that's a very exciting horizon, which really will make the use case for digital passes. Next slide. Next slide. This is
Chester, we have just under a minute left for yours.
Maybe skip the Hong Kong corridor. Yep. It's what the app looks like. It's on Android and Huawei and Apple. But so fundamentally, if you look at my video, it's really a set of certificates. So here's what the actual app looks like. There are hundreds of certificates, and each certificate corresponds to an authentication and a verification standard and a route-specific standard for compliance. And that's the way that we deal with all the heterogeneity of the different systems, is by creating individual certificates for each use case. Next slide. So that's essentially the summary. I think maybe one more slide, and that's probably the end. One more slide. One more slide. Next slide. You're welcome to the detail of the slides if you want to take them home. It's just some of our current favorite relationships. And next slide, please. Yeah. So that's the end. I'll put my link in the chat, and if anybody's interested in sort of working with the ICC for these types of global solutions, and also adopting the technology, we're completely open to discussion. And the priority is to get people moving. And so far we're having a reasonable success. But we're very much on the ground, fighting every day, solving real problems. And it's great to learn from the other presenters as well. All right, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Chester, John, and Andrea. Andrea, I apologize for butchering the introduction. Won't happen again if we have you on another one. But I love that finding common standards and quality interoperability is on top of mind for yours, for AOKpass and ICCA. Couldn't agree more. But thank you, gentlemen. Have a great evening. Thanks for staying up, Chester.
Still awake.